I thought my family was planning my 75th birthday. That was the only explanation that made sense. For almost 2 weeks, every time I walked into the room, the conversations stopped. My son Michael would clear his throat and suddenly ask if I'd seen the weather forecast. My daughter-in-law Karen would smile a little too brightly and suggest I sit down while she made me coffee. Even my granddaughter Emma, who couldn't keep a secret to save her life, started acting strangely quiet whenever I appeared. At first I found it amusing. Then I found it unsettling. One Tuesday afternoon in Seattle, I returned home earlier than expected after my doctor's appointment was canceled because of a power outage. I unlocked the front door as quietly as I always did, careful not to let it slam. The house smelled faintly of cinnamon candles, and I could hear voices drifting from the dining room. I smiled to myself. They're finally planning it, I thought. I took off my jacket and started toward the kitchen, already imagining the awkward surprise faces I'd see when they realized I'd come home early. Then I heard my name. She can't know until everything's finalized. I stopped walking. Michael's voice was low, almost a whisper. Karen answered, if she finds out now, she'll never agree. Agree to what? I stood perfectly still, my hand resting against the hallway wall. Michael sighed. We've waited long enough. After her birthday, we'll have to move quickly. The smile disappeared from my face. My birthday? Move quickly. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Maybe they were talking about a surprise vacation. Maybe they wanted to renovate the house. Maybe there was a perfectly innocent explanation. Then Karen laughed softly. Once she's out of the house, everything becomes so much easier. The words hit harder than I expected. Out of the house. A strange tightness settled in my chest. For the first time in years, I felt like a guest in the home my late husband and I had bought 42 years earlier. I should have walked into the room and asked them what they meant. Instead, I stayed hidden. Something inside me wanted to know what came next. Michael lowered his voice even further. The realtor already said the market's perfect. My heart skipped. Realtor? Karen replied almost immediately. We'll finally be able to pay off the lake house. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. The silence somehow hurt more than the words. I quietly backed away before the floor beneath me could creak. Outside, rain had started falling, the soft Seattle drizzle that usually brought me comfort. That afternoon, it felt colder than I could remember. When my husband Daniel died 8 years earlier, Michael had insisted I never sell the house. You belong here, he'd told me while helping carry groceries inside. We'll always take care of you. I believed him. Maybe that's what every parent wants to believe their child means every promise they make. After Daniel's funeral, I rewrote my will, not because anyone asked me to, because it seemed practical. Michael was our only child. Everything would eventually become his anyway. I never imagined that, eventually, might not be patient enough for someone else. That evening, everyone acted completely normal. Karen made my favorite pot roast. Emma showed me pictures from college. My grandson Noah complained about his math teacher. Michael even raised his glass. Only 5 more days until the big celebration. Everyone smiled. So did I. But now I noticed little things. Karen checking Michael's expression before speaking. Michael avoiding eye contact whenever I mentioned the house. Emma looking genuinely confused every time birthdays came up, as though she knew a celebration was happening but not all the details. I wondered if everyone was keeping the same secret, or if some people were being kept in the dark. That question stayed with me long after dinner ended. The following morning, I found Michael measuring the living room with a tape measure. "What are you doing?" I asked. He looked startled. "Oh, nothing." I glanced at the tape stretched across the hardwood floor. Doesn't look like nothing. He forced a laugh. Karen wants new furniture. Since when do you measure an entire room just to buy a couch? For a split second, panic flashed across his face. Then it disappeared. You know how your daughter-in-law is. He rolled up the tape measure so quickly it almost slipped from his hands. Something wasn't right. Not just because of what I'd overheard. Because Michael had become a terrible liar. As a little boy, he'd blink 3 times whenever he hid something. At 48 years old, he still did. That afternoon, my best friend Grace invited me to lunch downtown. Grace had spent 35 years as a real estate attorney before retiring. She noticed something was wrong before I'd even ordered my soup. You've barely touched your coffee. I smiled weakly. I'm just tired. She folded her arms. Evelyn, no one said my name quite like Grace. One word. And somehow it became impossible to lie. So I told her. Not everything. Just enough. The whispered conversation. The realtor. The comment about getting me out of the house. Grace didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she stared out the restaurant window for a long moment. Finally, she asked one question. Who owns the house? I do. Only you. Daniel transferred everything into my name before he passed. She nodded slowly. Have you signed anything recently? I thought about it. No. Power of attorney? No. Property documents? No. She leaned back. Good. I frowned. Why? Good. Instead of answering, Grace reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. I want you to make copies of every document related to your house. I looked at the card. It belonged to another attorney, a probate specialist. My stomach tightened. You think I'm overreacting? Grace looked directly into my eyes. I think you've overheard just enough to know something is wrong. She paused, but not enough to know how wrong. Before I could ask what she meant, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Michael. Don't make any plans for Friday afternoon. We have something very special waiting for you. I stared at the screen. Then I looked back at Grace. She wasn't smiling anymore. She was staring at the message with an expression I'd never seen on her face before. And when she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Whatever they're planning, don't sign a single piece of paper. The rest of that afternoon, Grace's warning echoed in my head louder than the rain tapping against my windshield. Don't sign a single piece of paper. It sounded dramatic, almost paranoid. And yet, the woman sitting across from me had spent 3 decades untangling family disputes after people had trusted the wrong person. She wasn't someone who panicked easily. When I got home, the house was unusually quiet. Karen's SUV was gone, and Michael's truck wasn't in the driveway. I let myself in and noticed a stack of mail sitting neatly on the kitchen counter. Mixed in with the bills was a large white envelope addressed to me. No return address. Inside was a birthday card. There was no signature, just one sentence, typed instead of handwritten. Be careful who asks you to celebrate. I read it 3 times. No explanation, no clue who had sent it. For a moment, I wondered if Grace had arranged it, but it didn't feel like something she'd do. I slipped the card into my purse before anyone came home. I wasn't ready to tell Michael or Karen about it. Not yet. Over the next 2 days, the house felt less like a home and more like a stage where everyone knew their lines except me. Whenever I entered a room, conversations ended. Karen started taking phone calls outside. Michael kept disappearing into the garage with his laptop. Once, I walked in just as he snapped it shut. Working, I asked. Just paying bills. Since when do bills make you sweat? He laughed, but it sounded forced. You're imagining things, Mom. Maybe I was. I wanted to believe I was, because the alternative was something I couldn't bring myself to say out loud. Thursday evening, Emma knocked softly on my bedroom door. Grandma, come in. She sat on the edge of my bed, twisting the sleeve of her sweatshirt around her fingers. She'd done that since she was 6, whenever something was bothering her. "You okay?" I asked. She nodded too quickly. "I just wanted to make sure you'll be here tomorrow. I live here, I know." She hesitated. "I mean all day." Something about the way she asked made my heart sink. "I don't have any plans." She smiled, but it never reached her eyes. "Good." As she stood to leave, I caught her hand. "Emma." She turned back. "Is there something you want to tell me?" For a second, I thought she might. Her lips parted. Then footsteps echoed down the hallway. Emma pulled her hand away. "Happy early birthday, Grandma." She disappeared before I could ask another question. I sat there long after the door closed. She wasn't hiding something from me. She was hiding something from someone else. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. Around midnight, I walked downstairs for a glass of water. The light in Michael's home office was still on. His door wasn't completely closed. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but as I passed by, I heard Karen's voice. "She doesn't suspect anything," Michael answered. "I hope not. What if Grace says something?" "Grace? Why would they even mention Grace?" Karen sighed. "She's always been protective of your mother." Michael didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said something that made my knees feel weak. "That's why everything has to happen tomorrow." I stepped backward before they could hear me. My heart pounded so loudly, I was sure it would give me away tomorrow, whatever they were planning. Tomorrow mattered. Friday morning arrived with bright sunshine, the first clear day Seattle had seen all week. Karen insisted on making me breakfast. Pancakes. Fresh fruit. Even bacon cooked exactly the way I liked it. She'd never done that before. Michael walked into the kitchen carrying flowers. "Dad used to buy these for you. White lilies. Daniel had bought them every anniversary." I smiled politely. Inside, something felt terribly wrong. People don't suddenly become perfect, not without a reason. Around noon, Karen suggested I get dressed. "We have reservations." "Where?" "It's a surprise." I looked toward Emma. She looked confused. "What restaurant are we?" Karen interrupted. "You'll see." Emma immediately went quiet. That caught my attention. She genuinely didn't know. Whatever was happening, not everyone was included. The restaurant overlooked Elliott Bay. It was beautiful. One of Daniel's favorite places. My family had reserved a private dining room. Balloons decorated the walls. A large cake sat near the window. For a brief moment I felt ashamed of myself. Maybe I'd misunderstood everything. Maybe this really was just a birthday celebration. Friends arrive, old neighbors, 2 cousins, even Pastor Williams came. Everyone hugged me, laughed, shared memories for nearly 2 hours. I forgot every suspicious conversation I'd overheard. Then dessert was served. Michael stood, tapped his glass. "I'd like to say a few words." The room fell silent. He smiled at me. I couldn't have asked for a better mother. People nodded. Karen reached into a gift bag beside her chair. She handed Michael a leather folder. My pulse quickened. He walked over and knelt beside me. "Mom?" His smile never changed. "I know today is about celebrating you." He opened the folder. "But before we cut the cake, there's one small thing we'd love your help with." He placed several papers on the table. From where I sat, I couldn't read the title. Michael slid a pen toward me. "It'll only take a minute." The room watched quietly. I didn't touch the pen. "What is it?" Karen answered before Michael could. "Oh, it's just paperwork." "What kind of paperwork?" She smiled. "The boring kind." A few guests chuckled. I didn't. Grace's words came back with startling clarity. "Don't sign a single piece of paper. Michael, gently pushed the documents closer. It'll make things much easier later. Later. The same word he'd used during that whispered conversation. I looked around the room. Most people had no idea what was happening. Emma looked nervous. Noah looked bored. Pastor Williams frowned slightly, as if he couldn't understand why legal documents had appeared at a birthday party. I looked back at Michael. If it's not important, why can't I read it at home? For the first time all afternoon, his smile disappeared. The room became so quiet that I could hear glasses clink in the kitchen beyond the dining room doors. Karen laughed softly. Evelyn, you're overthinking this. I probably am. I folded my hands in my lap, so you'll understand if I read every page first. Michael's jaw tightened. It isn't complicated. Then you won't mind waiting. Neither of them answered. Instead, they exchanged a look, not a glance. A decision, and that's when I realized something that frightened me even more than the papers themselves. This wasn't part of the birthday. The birthday was part of the plan. Just then, there was a knock at the private dining room door. Every head turned. The server opened it. A woman stepped inside carrying a leather briefcase. I recognized her instantly. She worked in Grace's law office. She looked directly at me, then at the folder in front of Michael. Without taking her eyes off him, she said calmly, "Mrs. Carter, I believe those documents deserve a much closer look." Mrs. Carter, for a second. I didn't even realize she was speaking to me. Every conversation in the room stopped. Michael slowly stood up. Karen's smile vanished so quickly, it was almost startling. The woman walked toward our table with quiet confidence and set her briefcase on an empty chair. "I'm sorry to interrupt your celebration," she said. "But Grace asked me to stop by if I wasn't able to reach you before lunch." I looked at her in confusion. "Grace," she nodded. "She tried calling you several times this morning." I reached for my purse. My phone had been on silent. 3 missed calls, 2 voicemails, 1 text. "Please don't sign anything until we talk." A chill ran through me. Michael cleared his throat. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." The attorney looked at him politely. "Perhaps." She turned back to me. "Mrs. Carter, before you sign any legal document, would you mind if I reviewed it first?" Karen leaned forward. "That's really unnecessary." The attorney smiled. "If it's unnecessary, then reviewing it shouldn't be a problem." No one spoke. I picked up the folder for the first time. The title on the first page made my stomach tighten. "Durable Power of Attorney." I looked at Michael. "What is this?" He hesitated. "It's just in case something ever happens. You told me it was birthday paperwork. It is connected to your future." "That's not what I asked." The attorney quietly extended her hand. "May I?" I gave her the folder. She flipped through the pages, her expression changing ever so slightly with each one. When she reached the end, she closed it gently. Then she looked directly at me. Double quotes, "Mrs. Carter, this document gives your son authority over your finances, your property, and many of your legal decisions if it's executed under the terms written here." The room fell silent. Even the servers in the hallway seemed to stop moving. I stared at Michael. "You wanted me to sign this? At my birthday party?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "We were only trying to help." Karen quickly added, "It would have made everything easier." "Easier for who?" Neither of them answered. Most of our guests left within 15 minutes. No one wanted to stay after realizing they had unknowingly walked into a family dispute. Pastor Williams quietly squeezed my shoulder before leaving. "I'm praying for wisdom," he whispered. Emma hugged me tightly. "I'm sorry, Grandma." I looked down at her. "What are you apologizing for?" Tears filled her eyes. I thought it was just paperwork for the party. She wasn't lying. I could see it. She had been used just as much as I had. That evening, Grace came to my house. She spread every document I owned across my dining room table. Deed, will, insurance papers, bank records. She checked each one carefully. Nothing had been altered. Nothing had been forged. Finally, she leaned back. You caught this before any damage was done. I exhaled slowly. What if I'd signed? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked out the window toward the maple tree Daniel had planted 30 years earlier. You would have spent years trying to undo it. I closed my eyes for the first time all day. I cried, not because of the paperwork, because I kept remembering. A little boy who used to run through this house wearing rain boots 2 sizes too big. A little boy who once cried because he accidentally stepped on a ladybug. Somewhere between then and now I'd lost him. Or maybe he'd lost himself. Michael called the next morning. I let it ring, then again, and again. Finally, he left a voicemail. Mom, this isn't what it looks like. I listened to it twice, then deleted it. Not out of anger, out of exhaustion. Over the next month, I made changes. Real changes. Grace introduced me to an estate planner. I updated my will, created a medical directive, assigned a neutral professional as my financial power of attorney instead of a family member. I placed my home in a trust with clear instructions that no one could sell it without my written consent while I was alive. Grace smiled when we finished. You've protected yourself. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. Michael showed up unannounced one Sunday afternoon. He looked tired, older somehow. I just want to talk. I invited him onto the front porch, not inside. He noticed. His shoulders dropped slightly. I'm sorry. I believed that he was sorry, but I wasn't sure what he was sorry for. Being caught, or making the choice in the first place. He looked at the porch floor. The lake house became too expensive. I waited. We were drowning in debt. I still said nothing. He continued. I thought, if we sold this place, our problems would disappear. I looked across the yard where Daniel had taught Michael how to ride his first bicycle. Did you ever think to ask for help? His eyes filled with tears. I was ashamed, more ashamed than asking me to unknowingly sign away control of my life. He couldn't answer. A few days later, Karen wrote me a letter, not an email, a handwritten letter. She admitted the idea had started with her. She believed they were simply moving things forward. She apologized for the deception. She said she never intended to hurt me. I folded the letter carefully. Intentions matter, but choices matter more. I never replied. Some conversations don't need another chapter. Emma visited every Saturday after that. Sometimes we baked. Sometimes we watched old home videos. Sometimes we sat on the porch, saying almost nothing at all. One afternoon, she asked quietly, "Are you ever going to forgive Dad?" I watched 2 hummingbirds dart between the flowers. I already have. She looked surprised, but forgiveness doesn't always rebuild trust. She nodded slowly, as if she'd learned something no college class could teach. When my 76th birthday arrived the following year, I celebrated it very differently. No restaurant. No speeches, no surprises. Just a backyard barbecue. A few close friends, Grace, Emma, Noah, Pastor William's neighbors who had become family over the decades. People who came because they wanted to spend time with me, not because they wanted something from me. As the sun began to set over Seattle, Grace handed me a small wrapped box. Inside was a simple silver wind chime. A tiny engraving hung beneath it. Home is where you're safe. I smiled through tears. Daniel used to say something similar whenever storms rolled in. We hung it on the porch together. That evening, the breeze carried its soft chime through the yard. Peaceful, gentle, earned. Michael wasn't there. That was his choice. Months later, he asked if we could start over. I told him the truth. We can start something new, but we can't pretend the old story never happened. Healing, I learned, isn't about forgetting. It's about refusing to let betrayal become the final chapter. I still live in the same house Daniel and I bought 43 years ago. The maple tree is taller now. The porch creaks in the same places every morning. I make coffee and sit outside listening to that little silver wind chime. Sometimes the sound reminds me that families can break your heart. Sometimes it reminds me that strangers can protect it. But most of all, it reminds me of something I almost forgot on my 75th birthday. Growing older doesn't mean surrendering your voice, and loving your family should never require signing away your dignity.